McCrispy strips are now at McDonald's. Tender, juicy, and its own sauce. Would you look at that? Well, you can't see it, but trust me, it looks delicious. New McCrispy strips, now at McDonald's. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 184 of the True Crime All the Time Unsolved podcast. I'm Mike Ferguson, and with me, as always, is my partner in true crime, Mike Gibson. Gibby, what is going on?
Hey, man, how you doing?
I'm doing great.
Yeah, me too.
I like it when you're doing great.
Yeah.
We do seem to be doing great quite a bit.
Seems like we do.
I guess that's just the kind of guys we are, man. We just don't get that down.
We're not downers, man.
We don't let it get us down.
Yeah, we're not.
Whatever it is.
Yeah, we're not Debbie Downers.
Womp, womp. You know what's not a downer?
What's that?
Is the fact that we continue to see some great support, and we truly appreciate it. Let's give some Patreon shout outs.
Alrighty.
We had Teresa Rossmeisel,
Hey, Ross Meisel.
Matthew Parla,
What's going on, Matthew?
Holly Penny,
Hey, Holly.
and
Jazan.
Ashley Longnecker,
What's going on, Longnecker?
Savannah Fair,
Hey, Savannah.
Christoph Bachman,
Ooh, Christoph.
Jim's Nunn,
Hey, Jims.
Lillian Burns,
What's going on, Lillian?
Frank,
Hey, Frank.
Chad Martin,
Hey, Chad.
Helen Bryden,
What's happening, Helen?
Anthony Harper,
Hey, Anthony.
Mackenzie Tuttle,
What's going on, Tuttle?
Mindy Rhodes,
Well, hi, Mindy.
Cindy Lacey,
Well, thank you, Cindy.
Jamie Drago,
Ooh, the Drago.
Josh Schwartz,
What's going on? Schwartz may be with you.
Autumn,
Well, hi, Autumn.
Crystal Zickfoos,
Ooh, Zickfus.
Abby Hayes,
Hey, Abby.
Jen Harris,
Thank you, Jen.
James Evans,
What's happening, James?
and Lynn Powell.
Hey, LP.
So a lot of great support. Like I said, we really appreciate it. And then if we go back into the vault, this week we selected our very good friend, Kimberly Pavone.
Appreciate that, Kimberly.
Yeah, we do. We've actually hung out with Kimberly quite a bit.
Yeah,
I don't know if all the crime cons, but I know she's been to most of them.
pretty frequently.
Yep. We had some great PayPal donations as well. Michelle Robinson,
Hey, Michelle.
Kathleen Martin,
What's going on, Kathleen?
and Pauline Thames.
Hey, Pauline.
So thank you to everyone. Gibbs, we did our weekly little Patreon minisode, and we changed it up.
We did.
You took the lead, you read out the names, and I played more of the Gibby role. It was fun.
Yeah. It's a much better Patreon than we ever did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a much better, or it's one of the best.
And that's another reason why you need to join and go listen.
We did crack ourselves up. I will say that. Right now, we have a brand new episode out on True Crime All the Time. We're talking about Ryan Jenkins.
Man.
So we've got, television reality shows, supermodels, and murder.
It's everything you could want in one package.
It's an interesting case.
Yeah.
It really is. So make sure you check that out. All right, Gibby, are you ready to get into this episode of True Crime All the Time Unsolved?
Man, I am so ready.
It was in the small town of Allander, located in Bertie County. We're talking eastern North Carolina here.
Yeah.
That there was a brutal murder of Allen Ray Jenkins that occurred in 1995. But before we dive into the murder of Allen Ray Jenkins, let's talk a little bit about his background, because I think it's very important to this case. According to investigators, at the age of 56, Jenkins had just recently retired as a truck driver from the North Carolina Department of Transportation. He was a very private man, didn't let a lot of people into his home or really into his life. So in that respect, he was a lot like me. I'm a very private person.
You are.
Now, where we differ greatly is that Allen Ray Jenkins had a past criminal record that involved underage girls. In 1990, Jenkins was charged with the statutory rape of a 14-year-old girl. He was 51 years old at the time. And apparently he would buy this girl wine coolers and keep his fridge stocked so that when she came over to his house, she had plenty of wine coolers to drink. At the time of his arrest, the Raleigh News and Observer stated that his fridge was packed with Seagram's Black Cherry and California coolers.
Good old Black Cherry. Were you a wine cooler drinker back in the day?
No, I never was.
So Bartles and James.
I remember all of the Seagrams, the Bartles and James.
Yeah.
And I remember being at parties back in this time frame that we're talking about.
Right.
And there'd be a lot of wine coolers, but I wasn't a wine cooler.
You're probably a Zima.
No, I didn't like Zima either. I was more of a Mad Dog 2020.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe some Boone's Farm.
Oh, little Boone Farm.
Strawberry. Or just your Bud Light.
Yeah.
I'd go that route too.
Little Mickey's.
No, that was out of my price range, I think. Weren't those a little more expensive?
A little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. I said Bud Light. I was probably Milwaukee's Best Light.
Yeah.
That was probably more in my price range.
Yeah.
So very serious charges, right? Levied against Allen Ray Jenkins.
Right.
Now, he told authorities he never raped a girl, but they did, in his words, mess around twice. And he admitted to sexual contact. He pleaded guilty to 2 counts of indecent liberties with a minor, at which point the statutory rape charges were dropped. So he received 6 months for that charge and 5 years probation and was ordered to stay away from minors.
It's probably a good thing.
I would say that would definitely be a good thing, right? You should have no contact with minors whatsoever. Jenkins got out of prison in February of 1991. And a month later, his mother died. So he moved into her house. According to his brother, Allen Ray Jenkins liked to party. He held a lot of parties at his home almost every weekend. Loud music, but also a lot of young boys and girls.
Yeah.
And a lot of wine coolers.
Well, you got to have the young boys there to get the young girls there.
And I'm sure that was part of his plan. According to a neighbor, Jenkins was pretty wild. And the neighbor told the local paper that she thought Jenkins paid for sexual favors from several young women. Some she felt were younger than 16 years old.
Pretty bold statement.
You're either pretty sure of yourself or you're not worried about any repercussions to come out and say that. But it wasn't just this neighbor. There were other people that, talked to investigators and said Jenkins would pay women to come to his house and clean it while, wearing barely anything at all. Okay, that in and of itself is not illegal as long as they're of age.
Sure.
The question becomes, how old were they? He also paid women to come over and do, strip tease like dances. Again, nothing illegal about that.
Yeah, as long as they were of age.
As far as I know, there might be something as maybe they're not allowed to do it in your house. I don't know. I don't know the laws, but I think the big distinction would be, to me, the ages of these females that he's paying to do things. Because it would come out that there were a number of women who said while at his home, Jenkins would sit around and watch girls while he wore women's underwear, or he just was wearing like a short towel.
Which is, the woman's underwear is strange. The small towel draped kind of thing I get because you do that sometimes, which is uncomfortable for me.
It is. I'm sure it is when you're sitting right across from me.
Yeah. So, but thank goodness you don't wear female underwear.
But I think we're getting into an area, and I know we are.
Right.
He's already been charged for, having sexual contact with a minor. One of Jenkins' friends mentioned that at his retirement party, he had about a dozen young naked girls inside his home dancing, and that these girls performed sex acts on each other while the men in the room sat around and watched.
So really not your average Saturday night in small town USA.
Well, I sure hope not, because if it is, we're in big trouble. But it's also, Gibbs, if you think about it, not the normal type of background information.
No, we don't get a lot of information like this on a victim.
No, most of the time we're talking about how friends and family said that, their loved ones lit up a room. They were on track to do great things. Not a lot of that, right? Coming out about Allen Ray Jenkins. Everything is pretty dark, criminal, creepy.
Yeah, wrapped around this sexual contact with these underage girls.
We've had it before, but it's strange to have who we know is the victim in this case also be somewhat of a predator. Not even somewhat. This guy, if all accounts are true, he was doing some really creepy stuff. But on April 14th, 1995, Allen Ray Jenkins was found murdered inside his home on Lombardy Street. The local authorities, along with the State Bureau of Investigations, were called in. They found Jenkins lying on his bedroom floor in front of his waterbed, wearing a short blue and white striped towel held together by his safety pin. I don't understand the wearing a small towel around the house. I get it that somebody might walk around with a big towel after they got out of a shower.
Right.
This sounds like normal garb to this guy. And it's short if you got to hold it together with a safety pin.
Yeah. I always think of that movie, Starsky and Hutch, with Ben Stiller.
Mm-hmm.
They were showering afterwards and the only towel left was like the hand towel and they had to wrap it around them. That's what I'm thinking of right now.
It's probably not that far off.
Yeah.
But you have to admit it seems strange that he would be found wearing this. You have women and girls who had told stories about seeing him in his house wearing this. And there's a reason why we're telling all of these things. It's not to shame this guy or to badmouth this guy. It's important to the story. Jenkins had been shot twice with a shotgun in the chest, and there was dried blood everywhere. His body was bloated and had turned bluish black in color. His veins appeared to be marbled. The smell of his dead body was so strong that many of the investigators, they couldn't even enter the home.
It's a strong smell, as we discussed on TCAT.
We did. We talked a little bit about the smell of death. Some of his flesh had decayed, and maggots and flies were all over his body. The medical examiner later determined that Allen Ray Jenkins had 10 shotgun pellets lodged in his flesh, and 5 had gone all the way through him. Investigators found more pellets throughout the bedroom near his body. Allen's blood sprayed up onto the bedroom doorframe and dripped down it at some point. And the investigators concluded that the shooter had to be standing at the bedroom door entrance when they shot Allen based on the blood spatter patterns.
So based on the body's condition, it sounds like he had been dead for quite some time.
Yeah, and we're going to get into it a little bit more as we dive into the case, what investigators believe, what the medical examiner thinks. But the local investigators and SBI received a lead about 2 young girls, Crystal Morris and Shanna Hall, both 15 years old at the time of the murder. Crystal Morris lived with her best friend, Shanna Hall, at her parents' home. They had known Allen Ray Jenkins since the age of 12, and they had attended some of his parties that we spoke about. The girls were considered persons of interest and told investigators that they had some information to share. But before they would share it, they wanted a plea deal. The girls agreed to plead guilty to second-degree murder and armed robbery in exchange for their truthful testimony versus what they could have gotten, which was first-degree murder and conspiracy.
Clearly, the girls had some type of involvement into the murder. Why else would they make any type of deal, especially for second-degree murder?
So the girls told investigators that on April 3rd, 1995, Shanna's boyfriend at the time, 22-year-old Alan Gell, drove them to the town of Allander, and dropped them off outside of Allen Ray Jenkins' house. And then he left. The girls said that they and Jenkins just hung out in his home. They were drinking wine coolers. And then later that afternoon, Jenkins left to get more wine coolers from the local store called the Red Apple. Once he left the house, Crystal Morris told investigators that she called Alan Gell. And while they were talking, it came up that they needed to rob Jenkins to get his cash. The girls told investigators that Alan Gell told them to meet him over at the Red Apple store after Jenkins returned. So we're getting into why these girls felt as though they needed to make a deal.
Yeah.
That would get them second degree versus first degree.
Well, we've said it before. You're always better off to be the first person to speak. If you know that they have you and you can make a deal with them, you're typically better off making a deal before somebody else makes a deal.
Yeah, I would agree with you. And I think this case, as we go through it, is a prime example of that. Now, it's a strange example,
right?
But it's a good example. Once Allen Ray Jenkins returned home, the two girls told him that they were going to head out for a while. They then met up with Alan Gell, and as they were walking from the Red Apple to Jenkins' home, the girls told investigators that Gell said he was going to rob Jenkins with his knife. Once they got back inside the house, Crystal hung around in Jenkins' bedroom with him, helping him hook up a VCR that he had recently purchased. Shanna told investigators she used the bathroom and then walked outside to the back of the house. Her boyfriend, Alan Gell, was standing there outside. Shanna said that he was acting strange and quiet, and they didn't speak.
Yeah, almost like mysterious, like he was in a trance or something like that.
Shanna said that when she got back inside the house, she saw Crystal and Jenkins in the kitchen getting ice for their drinks. Crystal told investigators as she followed Jenkins back to his bedroom, she was surprised to see Alan Gell behind the bedroom door, and it was Gell who shot Jenkins twice as he got inside the bedroom. Shanna said she didn't see the shooting, but she heard two shots. She said she ran inside to see her boyfriend, Alan Gell, holding a shotgun, yelling at both of the girls, wanting to know where the money was. Crystal told Alan Gell it was in the locked cabinet. So he broke it open and took the cash, checkbook, and keys to the house. Then the three of them, Alan, Crystal, and Shanna, fled the scene with the stolen property and the shotgun and empty shells. They walked behind the house and went into some nearby woods where Gell tossed the gun, shells, house keys, and his knife.
So all evidence is disposed of?
I guess you have to look at what the word disposed of means. To me, disposed of means, you really got rid of it.
Right.
They didn't get rid of this stuff. They just threw it in the woods where anybody could find it. Anybody could stumble upon it. But it just comes down to your definition of the word disposed. I'm not trying to contradict you. I'm just trying to bring up the differentiation, I guess.
No doubt. If you really wanted to get rid of it the right way, it would never be found again.
I think they probably in their mind thought they disposed of the evidence. But I think you and I and most people would think, that's not a great way to dispose of things.
No.
The girls told investigators that Gell then counted the money and said to them that Jenkins lost his life for $400. Later that night, the three walked to Crystal's grandmother's home and used her phone to have Crystal's boyfriend come pick them up. The boyfriend later told investigators that he picked them up and dropped them off at their homes around midnight. Shanna Hall told investigators that the next morning, Gell picked her up in a stolen truck and drove them up through Virginia and Maryland. Along the way, she tossed Jenkins' wallet, checkbook, and other items out the window while driving over a bridge. And then a couple of days later, the two returned to North Carolina.
Now, see, that is how you would get rid of evidence. Throwing it over a random bridge into some water.
In another state.
Yeah.
Not telling people how to dispose of evidence
No.
after a murder, but I think if you're looking at the two different types of disposal,
Right.
you would say one is much better than the other.
But also can see why you would not want to walk through town carrying a shotgun.
Yes, I get that. Yep, I get that. Jenkins' body was found on April 14th, 1995, and the autopsy was performed the next day. According to the medical examiner, the state of decomposition of the body indicated a time of death between 1 and 2 weeks. All right, that's a pretty big time frame,
It is.
but we already mentioned it. His body was in a serious state of decomposition. The medical examiner later confirmed that the insect larva could indicate he had been murdered on April 3rd, 1995, as the girls claimed. The girls showed investigators their disposal location in the woods behind Jenkins' home. So investigators had the murder weapon.
You do.
They had the motive.
Yeah.
And they had eyewitness accounts.
Seems like everything you would need.
Well, it was enough to arrest and charge Alan Gell with first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, armed robbery, and conspiracy to commit armed robbery. And in 1998, he went on trial. The prosecution had Shanna Hall and Crystal Morris as their star witnesses. They told the jury about the events that unfolded on April 3rd, 1995. The prosecution presented the weapon, the shotgun, the shells, and the knife.
All very compelling.
I would say so.
Yeah.
They also presented the medical examiner report. I think it's compelling when you have two witnesses who say they were at the crime scene when the crime occurred.
Right.
You have the murder weapon.
Yeah.
They told you where to find it, and it was exactly where they said it was. I think it's all compelling.
I think some of the jurors probably thought it was brave of these two young girls to get up on the stand and tell their stories.
I'm sure they did.
Yeah.
The defense team decided not to put Alan Gell on the stand. Instead, they brought in several character witnesses. I think most importantly, they brought in a witness that said Alan Gell did not murder Allen Ray Jenkins because he was not murdered on the April 3rd date. As the prosecution claimed, he couldn't have been because this witness said he had seen Jenkins alive after that date, which, according to the defense, meant the testimony of the girls could not be correct. So that's interesting, right? We talked about how compelling it was for these two girls to take the stand and tell their story. How compelling would it be for the jury to have a defense witness say, hey, I saw the victim after the date that you're trying to say he was killed?
You think it'd give some of the jurors cause to find reasonable doubt?
Yeah, I think you could make that argument. But Gibbs, I think in a lot of cases, when you're talking about testimony from one side versus the other, it comes down to, and not just testimony, but the totality of the evidence. Which side do you believe the most? The defense pressed for criminal charges against the girls for making false statements and accusations and presented evidence and testimony to make their case. The defense theorized that the girls murdered Jenkins, but offered up Alan Gell as the murderer to help lessen their charges, and the prosecution went along with it. The defense told the jury that the prosecution, the medical examiner, and the girls all had to have the date of the murder as April 3rd for only one reason. It was the only way they could put Alan Gell at the scene, because any other date in the first 2 weeks of April, Gell had either been traveling or he was in jail for petty crimes.
And that's important because if any of the girls' stories is not true, Or if you believe what this defense witness said, that they saw Allen Ray Jenkins alive after the 3rd, it blows this whole case wide open.
Or if the medical examiner is off.
Exactly. It all has to line up just right to make it fit.
On one date.
Yes.
April 3rd. After hearing the evidence that both sides laid out, a jury found Alan Gell guilty of first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, armed robbery, and conspiracy to commit armed robbery. He was sentenced to death on March 3rd, 1998. His defense team immediately appealed for several reasons. They cited false statements made to the jury tampering, and that the prosecution withheld key evidence. But in 1999, their appeal was denied.
Yeah, so case closed.
You would think.
Yeah.
Some people are probably also asking the question, why is this on Unsolved?
Well,
it's because the defense appealed again in 2002, and this time the appeal was successful. With a Bertie County Superior Court judge, the judge found that the prosecution had withheld evidence that was favorable to Alan Gell, and the judge vacated his conviction and remanded the case to the lower court for a new trial. I mean, I think this is huge, Gibbs. If you're a guy that's been sentenced to death,
yeah.
I mean, you have to feel like you've got a second chance.
You're breathing again, man.
Alan Gell was retried in February 2004. During the second trial, Gell's defense team had eyewitness statements. They had actual eyewitnesses who had told investigators back in 1995 that they had seen Allen Ray Jenkins in town or at his home on April 8th and April 9th. And Gibbs, we're not talking about 2 or 3 people here. They had 17 statements or eyewitnesses that said this same thing. And it turned out that the prosecution was fully aware of these eyewitnesses, these eyewitness statements at the time of the first trial. They just never turned that information over to the defense.
That's a huge number of eyewitnesses and eyewitness statements suppressed from the defense at the first trial. I mean, that's a huge deal.
Yeah. I mean, you've got 17 people who are saying that they saw the victim well after the time that the prosecution is stating he was killed. It is huge. The defense proved in the second trial that the medical examiner estimated time of death would have been different if the medical examiner would have known that Allen Ray Jenkins was last seen alive on April 9th. And I think that's pretty obvious. I don't think a medical examiner would say, yes, it's possible that this man died on the 3rd when 17 people said they saw him on either the 8th or the 9th. The medical examiner told the jury at the second trial that if the prosecutors had told her about all of these sightings by eyewitnesses, she would have predicted that Jenkins had died closer to April 14th than to the date of April 3rd, which is what she had testified to in Gell's first trial. That's a big difference in time.
It's a huge difference.
The medical examiner also told the jury that due to the high temperature in the house when Jenkins was found, his body would have decomposed very quickly, which could have helped support the April 3rd date. So like we said, big difference between April 3rd and April 14th.
Right.
But the medical examiner is trying to say that the high heat would have caused more decomposition than normal.
If things are going to decompose more rapidly because the heat's turned up, so maybe if he was last seen on the 9th, but was maybe, let's say he was killed on the 10th, with that heat up like that over the next 4 days, maybe you could theorize that he was killed on the 3rd based on the rapid decomposition.
Yeah, I mean, I think what she had to do, right, on the stand was explain how she could have even thought it was April the 3rd.
Right.
And she's doing that by saying, well, this heat could have made it seem like the body had been decomposing for longer than what it really had been.
Yes.
The defense also produced a tape recording made by Crystal Morris saying that she had to make up a story to tell the police to help her and Shanna out of the mess they were in. So, I mean, now, Gibbs, we have a different time of death.
Right.
You have to discount the witness testimony from the prosecution's star witnesses. And we mentioned it already, right? The prosecutor can only attempt to put Gell at Jenkins's house on April 3rd because he was confirmed to be either out of the state, making a drug run up in Maryland for a number of days. And then the other days, he was in jail for theft.
You can't get that date of April 3rd, case over, right?
So the defense is saying Alan Gell could not have been the murderer because he wasn't around at what is now being called the new time of death. The girl's testimony was made up, according to what Crystal Morris said on tape, on February 18th, 2004. The jury in Alan Gell's second trial took just a little over 2 hours before returning a not guilty verdict. A Bertie County Superior Court judge acquitted Alan Gell for the 1995 murder of Allen Ray Jenkins. So Gell was a free man.
Yeah, finally.
He had been on death row since 1998. I cannot even imagine what that must feel like for the person who's been sitting on death row, their entire family.
Yeah.
To find out that not only had they been found guilty when they were not guilty, they'd kind of been railroaded into this guilty verdict. And you can imagine there was a lot of media buzz around this case. You've got the Brady violations. It's kind of embarrassing for the state of North Carolina to have a prosecution team suppress exculpatory evidence in a murder case. And I think even more so because they went for and were successful in obtaining the death penalty.
Scary, man.
It's very scary.
Yeah.
You and I have talked about this on podcasts. We've talked about it off air.
Yes.
You know, these wrongful convictions scare the you-know-what out of me because you look at the evidence presented in a trial and you can see how a jury came to the decision that they did.
Right.
Well, then you find out that there was this evidence that they didn't have access to that clearly would have changed their minds. That is a scary, scary proposition.
It's definitely maybe rethink some things.
Yeah, me too. And maybe has made me question my, I don't want to say my faith in the judicial system because that's still there, but that absolute kind of certainty that a lot of us maybe felt years ago about, okay, the jury viewed all the evidence. They found this murderer guilty. He's guilty, he or she.
Yeah.
I probably used to think that, but now all of these things are being exposed that, you know, were either suppressed or fabricated, and you start to question things.
Well, sure. Yeah. It's a little alarming.
Because of this action in Alan Gell's wrongful conviction, the North Carolina legislature strengthened its protection of defendants by passing a law that required prosecutors in all felony cases to share their entire file with defendants. But now we've got to go back to the two girls, right? Shanna Hall and Crystal Morris. They had a plea deal for the lesser charge of second-degree murder when they agreed to testify against Gell. It was really hard to find information on Shanna and Crystal. There were articles that said they were scheduled to be released from prison in 2005. As far as I know, Gibbs, they've never made any statements about who murdered Allen Ray Jenkins.
Right.
Their plea deal gave them each 10 years. So if they did the entire term, they would have gotten out in 2005. They would have only been 25 years old.
Young enough to still have a good life in front of them.
Yeah. And there was no reports that they got additional time for what were obvious lies on the stand, right? They couldn't have told the truth, the entire truth.
Yeah, I'm surprised their plea deal
Wasn't revoked.
Yeah, after all that. But then again, maybe because the time that it was made to the time that it would have expired was...
Well, if you look at the chronology, Gell's conviction wasn't overturned until 2004.
Right.
So, I mean, they would have probably either already been out or gotten out.
That's true.
Right after it. There just wasn't enough information. We couldn't find it.
Right.
So that part's a little mysterious, just because the information doesn't seem to be out there.
Right.
But then you think about Allen Ray Jenkins's family. Okay, they thought this thing was all wrapped up. Right now, they don't have the answers that they thought they had. They thought they knew who pulled the trigger. Now they don't. They don't know why Jenkins was killed. That has to be haunting for members of his family. So I guess the question that I have, Gibbs, in this case is, if Alan Gell didn't pull the trigger and wasn't even at the scene of the crime,
right,
but Shanna and Crystal were, what was their real involvement?
Yeah.
Either one of them pulled the trigger,
right,
or they covered for somebody else that did.
And who was that person?
And who was that person? There are a lot of mysteries still in this case.
Right.
Because obviously it is an unsolved case. Alan Gell's life after prison took a bad turn. In April of 2006, he was charged with the statutory rape of a 15-year-old girl. Now, she was his girlfriend.
Right.
She was a few months shy of turning 16, the legal age of consent in North Carolina at the time, but she became pregnant at the age of 15. When they arrested Gell, he had some cocaine on him. So none of that is good.
No.
For him.
No.
He pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 5 years in prison. The girlfriend told the judge, quote, his arrest and conviction was bullcrap because she consented to the sex.
Yeah. But it's still against the law.
Well, and so is having cocaine.
Well, cocaine's, yeah.
Yeah, that too. I mean, in 2006, Alan Gell would have been what?
Well, he's 22 and 95.
33 years old?
Yeah.
It's a 33-year-old man having sex with a 15-year-old girl.
Yeah.
It's not good.
It's not good.
In 2008, Gell sued the SBI for his 1998 wrongful conviction and imprisonment. A year later, the state and the SBI settled. They paid him $4 million, which to me is a pretty high settlement.
Yeah.
Compared to some that we've seen. He spent 6 years on death row. He almost got $1 million for every year.
Yeah.
We've seen some where people only got $50,000 a year.
Sitting on death row.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't think any of these wrongful convictions are good, right? No amount of time spent on death row is good if you didn't, commit the crime. I continue to be perplexed at some of these settlements. Some of them seem pretty fair. Some of them seem very, very unfair. And I guess it just depends on the circumstances, the state. I mean, they had to have been in a tough spot here because the prosecution withheld key evidence.
Right.
So it wasn't a situation where they went after this guy thinking that he had killed this man without any knowledge that it most likely wasn't him.
Right.
Because that happens, right? Sure. Prosecutors just make a mistake, but it's based on evidence. And now the evidence may turn out to mean something different, but they didn't do anything that was illegal,
right?
Let's say, or unconstitutional. That wasn't the case here. This was a different situation. So he got $4 million. He got out of prison in 2011. And apparently, from everything that you read, he turned his life around. And he got married in 2015. So as far as I know, as far as I could tell, he has stayed out of trouble and he's doing well.
Living a good life now.
Well, he should have enough money if he spends it wisely and invests. And
yeah.
Gibbs, this is such a strange case for me all the way around. You have a murder victim who we had to say did some really horrible things.
Right.
You have a guy who was painted as the murderer, wrongfully convicted, and then turned out to do some things that weren't quite right.
Right.
Illegal. And then you have two girls, two 15-year-old girls at the heart of this whole thing, who to this day, no one really knows their true involvement. They had to have been there.
They have to. I mean,
we know that.
Yeah. Why else would you plea to
yes,
second-degree murder charge?
But to me, that's the very mysterious part. What role did they play in Allen Ray Jenkins' murder? Because I think there's only a couple options.
Right.
Either one of them was the shooter and they pinned this on Alan Gell to get a lighter sentence,
right,
or they did that to cover for someone else.
Yeah, I just don't know who they could possibly be covering for and accept a second-degree murder charge unless they were actually involved.
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough, and I think it's the big mystery in this case. But I don't know if we'll ever get the answer because there's really no reason for them to ever come forward and tell the complete truth, because obviously we haven't heard the complete truth, the full truth.
And we didn't see anything where the prosecution was going after them.
Oh, you mean after they found out that,
right,
that they couldn't have been telling the complete truth? Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. No, we didn't. The other thing I think about is, okay, they were minors at the time the murder was committed.
Right.
So let's say they did their full 10 years, which we're not sure, but let's say they did. How much more would they have gotten? Could they have been tried as adults? Maybe.
But then again, why would the prosecution want to go after them anyway, if I think about this? Because the prosecution backed that story all the way through.
Yeah, and that's a great point. Maybe that's the reason why there's really not much they could do to them, because any defense attorney would tear them a new one,
right,
based on what they had done in the first trial. So I don't know, but that's it for the case of murder of Allen Ray Jenkins. We've got some voicemails. You want to check them out?
Yeah, let's check them out.
Hey, Mike and Gibby, this is Tyler from Springfield, Illinois. Finally calling after years of listening to you guys. I'm a huge fan. I just want to say thanks for the podcast. You make my day a lot easier at work. And just recently, a bunch of my coworkers started getting the true crime podcasting, and they asked me, because I always have my headphones in, hey, what are you listening to? I said, true crime all the time. And they're like, oh my God. So that was pretty cool. I'm hoping that they hop on board. But yeah, I just want to say thanks for the podcast. I appreciate it. You make Sundays. I'm one of those guys that works the weekends, every weekend, so you guys make my weekend a lot easier and better. So, all right, guys, well, thanks again, and keep your own time ticking. Thank you.
Well, we appreciate that. The part that cracked me up, obviously, there is at the end, because you could tell he's at work.
Right.
and somebody comes over the intercom.
That's perfect, man.
Hi, this is Linda from North Carolina. I'm a longtime listener and Patreon supporter. I have missed listening to y'all on a more regular basis since all this COVID stuff. I always listened commuting to and from work every day, and I have not been doing that since March because we're working at home. So I've missed a few episodes, so I'm trying to catch up, period. Oh, sorry, I thought I was texting. Anyway, what I was calling about was I was listening to the episode where you were talking about dipping ink in the company, whatever you said about that. But what we say in the South is, don't get your honey where you make your money. So enjoyed listening to y'all and keep your own time ticking.
What's the saying, Gibbs?
Don't dip your pen in company ink.
Yeah, that's right. Now, that one that she said, I've never heard that one. Have you?
I like it, though.
I like it, too, but I've never heard it. So the pandemic, right, has been horrible for everyone. What I think it's done for our podcast in particular, obviously advertising's been way down. We've seen that. But she mentioned something interesting, which is, and I think this applies to a lot of people. A lot of people's daily routines have been turned upside down. And if you're one of those listeners who listens in the car on your way to work, on your way home, you're probably not listening to podcasts as much as you did. You know, that's kind of that time that you had, and that's gone.
Right.
There is no commute for a lot of people right now.
No.
But what it has done, I think it's brought a lot of new listeners who were tired of watching the same old things. They were looking for something new. They found us. That's great. What I'm hoping is that all of those people continue to listen. We get back to normal, whatever the new normal is going to be. And all of the people that get back into their routines listen, and our audience actually goes up.
I'm excited for that moment.
Dude, I cannot wait to get back to some level of normalcy.
Oh, man, me too. Let's get back to normal, get everything moving along again.
Yeah, I can't wait. And I don't want to discount the health, right, of everyone too. I mean, that's a very important part of it.
Hi, Mike and Gibby. This is Grace from Hawaii, and I just found your podcast on September 1st, just kind of looking for things to listen to. Got tired of watching TV and all that stuff since Hawaii's on lockdown again. But I have caught up from episode 1 to now, and I wanted to share you a story about Ed Gein. When I was in college, I had a statistics professor who wrote his final exam about Ed Gein, and it was a statistics exam, so it was questions like, if Ed buried 5 bodies in his backyard, 2 were female and 3 were male, what is the probability of him digging up a male body? That was our final exam. Like, all the questions were serial killer Ed Gein. So that's kind of when I started looking into true crime, and I'm just fascinated by it. And I love the way you guys present all of these stories. But anyway, I wanted to call and say thank you, and I'm a big fan. And also, I wanted to ask about the True Crime Unsolved, and wanted to know how I could start that from episode 1, because I can't seem to find it. Anyway, thanks for doing what you're doing, and keep your time ticking. Oh my gosh, keep your own time ticking. I think I got it. Thanks. Bye. Oh, and aloha.
Aloha.
Aloha. I said that strangely. But she did kind of back up what I was saying, right? She found us on September 1st, but I have to ask you the question. Gibbs, what's the answer to the Ed Gein burial question?
Well, there's a question within the question.
All right, Mensa boy.
So, depending how that question
is
answered.
If 2 bodies are female, 3 bodies are male, what's the probability that you would dig up? No, I did it backwards. 2 male, 3 female. What's the probability you would dig up a female?
Pretty good.
That is the correct answer. Or 60%. One of the two.
I hate to use percentages in those cases,
Yeah, because you like to be more exact by saying pretty good.
I mean, if I take that and I apply pie, right? And after I eat the pie, then I give a better answer.
Oh, all right, everyone. We got to get out of here. Gibby's got some Gibby's got some statistics homework he's got to get done.
I can't wait.
That's it for another episode of True Crime All the Time Unsolved. So for Mike
and Gibby,
stay safe and keep your own time ticking.